Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the families of the victims of these senseless crimes. The loss of their loved ones in such a tragic manner is heartbreaking, and their memories will forever be honored and cherished.
Imagine leaving your house for what you assume will be a typical day, but only to have someone you barely notice, or worse, someone close to you, change your life forever. These heartbreaking stories reveal the shocking reality that danger can come from the most unexpected sources in life. What happens when an innocent decision leads to an encounter with pure evil? 3 victims of unimaginable acts of violence, each case sending shockwaves through their families and the world. And these stories, trust turned deadly. How could this have happened? And how could it have been prevented? First, Wendy's trip to Bangkok turned deadly when Ritesh Narpatraj Sanghavi brutally murdered her, a man she had trusted. How could a friendly visit culminate in such a form of betrayal? Next, Jennifer Mills Wesley had gone on a quiet holiday to Tenerife, Spain, only to be beheaded in broad daylight by some random stranger. What would force someone to randomly attack another stranger in paradise? Lastly, Patricia El Torre, 13 years old from Bakersfield, California, was forced out of her house by Armando Cruz, a man she met online. What began as a harmless curiosity escalated into a nightmare that nobody could have ever imagined. Was there anything to spare this tragedy? First, in Bangkok, with the air heavy with the smell of spices and an eternal hum of activity, a chilling event occurred that shattered the serene veneer of this lively metropolis. At one point, Wendy Albano was considered one of America's most celebrated interior designers. She had arrived in Thailand in search of inspiration. But instead of discovering new ideas, she found herself entangled in a web of deceit and danger. What started as a journey filled with promise ended in brutal, shocking murder on Valentine's Day in 2012. But what really happened in that room of luxury? And how did Wendy's life come to such a tragic end? Let's go back and uncover the chilling truth behind Wendy Albano's final days. Wendy was born and raised in Florida, where the sun was always meant to shine as brightly as her future. She was driven and determined, carving her niche in the world of interior design. Her flair for turning spaces into something magical made her stand out, and soon, she became a well-renowned name in the design world. Wendy Albano was a highly talented American interior designer with a keen eye for beauty. She enjoyed a great reputation within design circles. Her career allowed her to travel, and one of her destinations was Bangkok, a city that seemed to offer endless inspiration as an artist. The rich cultural heritage and artistic flair of the city immediately appealed to her. It was here she met Ritesh Narpatraj Sanghavi, an Indian man she had been talking to on social media. Gravitating towards each other over their shared tastes in art and design, Ritesh quickly invited Wendy to explore the local scene during her visit. At first, he seemed like a kind and supportive friend. He showed Wendy around Bangkok, taking her to the city's cultural hotspots and introducing her to local events. Wendy was enchanted by both the city and her new friend. The more time Wendy spent with Ritesh, the stronger her connection to him grew. Her friends were thrilled as she was so excited about her new experiences in Bangkok. However, they did notice one thing. Ritesh was possessive. Wendy brushed off their concerns, saying he was just culturally different. She assumed he was looking out for her in a foreign country and never suspected danger. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2012, Wendy checked into the 5-star Fraser Suites Sukhumvit. The place was renowned for its comfort and elegance, a perfect retreat for a traveler like Wendy. That night, Ritesh visited Wendy at her hotel. He had been with her almost constantly during her stay, and to anyone who saw them, They appeared to be close friends, perhaps even more. But when he walked into her hotel that evening, Ritesh was far from friendly. Sometime later, several people reported hearing muffled screams from Wendy's room. But in a busy hotel where guests come and go and background noise is commonplace, these cries for help went unheard until it was too late. When hotel staff entered the room, they discovered a scene too horrifying to imagine. Wendy Albano, the vibrant and creative woman who had come to Bangkok in search of inspiration, lay dead in her room. She had been brutally stabbed multiple times, her life stolen in an instant of unimaginable violence. The room, once a place of comfort, now bore witness to a terrible crime. Wendy's murder sent shockwaves through all who knew her. Bangkok police immediately launched an investigation, determined to uncover every detail of the crime. Security footage from the hotel revealed the events leading up to the tragedy. It didn't take long for Ritesh Narpatraj Sanghavi to become the prime suspect. His sudden disappearance after the murder only deepened the suspicions surrounding him. He had planned his getaway carefully, melting into the night and out of Bangkok. Knowing he could be anywhere in the world, the search was extended across Thailand and beyond. Meanwhile, Wendy's family struggled to cope with the loss and were desperate for justice.
Right now, investigators are searching for the man they say murdered 51-year-old Wendy Albano in Bangkok, Thailand. Our Chris Martinez joins us now with how family and friends here in Tampa want her killer caught. Chris?
That's right, Wendy. And right now I can show you that police are using this photo right here as they work to track down that man in India. And tonight, friends of the victim say this guy's arrest can't come soon enough.
This turned the hunt for Ritesh into an international manhunt. Police around the world were notified, and leads were followed with urgency. The case captivated headlines as people everywhere eagerly awaited a breakthrough. Wendy's family, along with the authorities, were determined not to let her case fade away. For 2 years, Ritesh remained at large, compounding the frustration and pain Wendy's loved ones endured. But persistence paid off. And in September 2014, a tip led to Ritesh's arrest. He had been running a small mobile phone shop in Parbhani, Maharashtra, India. News of his arrest brought mixed emotion to Wendy's family, oscillating between relief and sorrow. Justice would finally be served, but it could never bring Wendy back. Ritesh's trial was highly publicized, with the media following every detail. Testimonies painted a chilling picture of the events leading up to Wendy's murder. Friends and family described Wendy as kind and compassionate, never imagining herself in danger. The prosecution painted a solid case, demonstrating how Ritesh betrayed Wendy's trust and murdered her in a fit of rage. The defense attempted to shift blame to the victim, painting a picture of a volatile, unstable relationship between Wendy and Ritesh. However, the jury saw through this and focused on the undeniable tragedy of a lost life. Photos of Wendy, smiling, adorned the courtroom, a poignant reminder of the vibrant woman she once was. Her death had left an unhealable void, but this trial was an opportunity for her loved ones to see justice served. When the verdict was finally read in the Delhi court on January 7, 2019, the courtroom was charged with emotion. Ritesh Narpatraj Sanghavi was found guilty. As of the latest news, the case was then sent to the Thailand embassy to convey its decision to eradicate Ritesh to face murder trials. As the sentence was announced, Wendy's family broke down in tears. It was a moment of both sorrow and relief for the loss they would never recover from, and relief that the person responsible would finally face justice. Wendy's story continued to tug at the world's heart for years to come. Her tragic end served as a stark warning of the dangers that can lurk behind smiles and friendly faces. Advocacy groups used her story to raise awareness, particularly for women traveling alone, about the importance of safety. Wendy's legacy also lived on through scholarships in her name, allowing young women to pursue careers in design. In this way, her passion for creativity continued to inspire others, ensuring that her memory was not solely defined by her tragic death. As time passed, Wendy became more than just a victim. Though Wendy is no longer here to carry her torch, the inspiration from her story of what she endured and what she stood for lives on. It reminds us all of the enduring power of love, creativity, and the human spirit. As the actual reason for the murder remains unknown, theories suggest that it could be because of some business conflict. As we reflect on Wendy Albano's life and tragic death, we must ask ourselves, how can we make the world a safer place for those who venture out? What can we learn from her life to prevent such tragedies in the future? Now imagine this, a sunny day in Tenerife with waves peacefully crashing on the shore and tourists enjoying the warmth of paradise. But beneath the calm, a chilling horror was about to unfold, leaving the island forever scarred by an act of unthinkable violence. Let's get into the story. On sun-kissed Tenerife, where turquoise waves caress golden shores and palm trees sway in warm breezes, a horror beyond imagination was about to unfold. For many, the island is an escape, a haven of beauty and tranquility. But for one British grandmother, 60-year-old Jennifer Mills Wesley, her trip was tragically ended in an outburst of violence. What began as a normal day became a nightmare, a story of mental illness, society failure, and heartbreak. On May 13, 2011, Jennifer Mills Wesley planned to continue enjoying her peaceful days in Tenerife, a place she had longed to visit for its charm and inviting atmosphere. Her days on the island had been filled with exploration, basking in the warmth of the sun, and the friendliness of locals. That morning, Jennifer decided to visit a nearby supermarket to pick up a few items before continuing her holiday. She could never have known that in the next few minutes, she would cross paths with a man whose life was consumed by chaos, a man who would unleash violence born out of his inner torment. The man was Dejan Dejanov, a 28-year-old Bulgarian with a deeply troubling history of mental illness. Growing up in a country plagued by economic struggles and social challenges, Dejanov's adulthood had been marred by homelessness and aimless wandering across Europe. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, he spent years in and out of psychiatric units, battling addiction and mental health crisis. His arrival in Tenerife was a cruel twist of fate. Instead of admiring the island's beauty, Dejanov became one of its darkest shadows, roaming the streets unnoticed by tourists, as their eyes focused on the island's magic. On that fateful day, Jennifer was simply browsing the supermarket, unaware that she had entered Dejanov's disturbed orbit. The voices in his head, never quiet, screamed louder than ever, driving him to an explosion of violence. To those around him, he may have appeared disoriented, even lost. But in reality, he had already set his sights on Jennifer. It must have been an utterly bewildering moment for Jennifer, as one moment she was walking through the quiet morning, and the next she found herself in incomprehensible danger. In a shocking and brutal act, Dejanov attacked her with a knife in broad daylight. The assault was swift and devastating. Jennifer was violently murdered in a matter of seconds, and the horror reached its peak when Dejanov beheaded her in front of the horrified onlookers. The supermarket, once filled with the gentle murmur of ordinary life, was suddenly silenced. Some people fled in terror, while others stood frozen in disbelief. The peaceful island of Tenerife had become the scene of one of the most horrific crimes in history. As the days went by, shock and sadness engulfed Tenerife. The brutal murder of Jennifer Mills Wesley made headlines around the world. With the arrest of Dejan Dejanov, the full extent of his troubled past was revealed, uncovering a series of missteps, failed treatments, and one descent into mental instability after another. Is the man who had taken Jennifer's life a cold-blooded killer, or a deeply disturbed individual whose cries for help had largely gone unnoticed? Dejanov's trial began in the provincial court of Santa Cruz de Tenerife, and the courtroom became a stage for the clash between justice and the failures of mental health care. Throughout the trial, Dejanov's defense focused on his mental state. He claimed to remember nothing about the attack, and the voices in his head had driven him to commit the brutal act. His schizophrenia, the defense argued, had left him detached from reality, unable to control his actions or comprehend the consequences. As the jury heard the grim details of the case, the true failure of the mental health care system became painfully clear. Dejanov had been treated in Wales before arriving in Tenerife, where psychiatric staff had grossly misjudged his condition. They believed he was faking his symptoms rather than genuinely suffering from the delusions that tormented him. With a history of severe mental illness, Dejanov had slipped through the cracks of a system meant to protect him and society at large. During the trial, witnesses recounted a day of terror. They spoke of Jennifer's desperate attempts to fend off her attacker and the sheer brutality of the assault. Dejanov was ultimately convicted of murder. However, instead of imprisonment, he was sentenced to 20 years in a secure psychiatric unit. Seeing the outcome of the trial, Jennifer's relatives were left outraged. Jennifer's daughters were completely shattered. Their beloved mother had lost her life in the most horrific way imaginable, and they felt the justice system had failed them. They believed their mother was taken by a man who should never have been free to roam the streets. Though they acknowledged the tragedy of Dejanov's mental illness, they argued it did not excuse the loss of their mother's life. They called for more transparency and accountability within the mental health system, demanding that no other family should have to bear such unimaginable pain. Several months after Jennifer's death, attention began to focus on Dejanov's release from psychiatric care. Dejanov's instability was well documented, yet he had been discharged and was free to travel to Tenerife, where his encounter with Jennifer sealed her fate. As more details of Dejanov's troubled past emerged, outrage within the community grew. He had been sectioned under the Mental Health Act with multiple admissions for psychiatric care, yet he was still able to take a life. Jennifer's death became a rallying cry for reform, with mental health advocates and grieving families calling for change. Amid their grief, there was a resolve that no such tragedy should happen again. Though the waves of Tenerife continue to lap at the shores and the palm trees sway in the breeze, it is as if life has moved forward. Yet, the events of that fateful day in May still linger in memory as a stark reminder of the duality of human experience, where beauty and horror can coexist. Jennifer Mills Wesley's story does not end with her tragic death. It lives on in ongoing conversations about mental health reform and in the push for better care to ensure individuals like Dejanov receive the help they need before it's too late. Her story is a call to action, a hope for a future where no more lives are lost to the shadows of misunderstanding. And lastly, on a warm summer evening in Bakersfield, California on July 1st, 2020, the sun had finally set below the horizon, painting everything in an orange hue. It was that evening when 13-year-old Patricia El Torre, bursting with the energy typical of her age, made a spontaneous decision, one that would tragically alter her life forever. Patricia El Torre was a typical teenager, bright, playful, and full of dreams. Her family loved her, and her friends enjoyed having her around because of her fun and lively spirit. But that night, the excitement of her plan to sneak out for a late-night meetup tugged at her. Patricia gave in to the thrill of the moment. Little did she know that this seemingly harmless decision would bring her face to face with a monster lurking in the dark. Unknown to Patricia, 26-year-old Armando Cruz from Inglewood, California, had been following her for some time. Cruz had a long history of problematic behavior, with a past marked by warning signs. Yet, he had always managed to escape serious consequences for his actions. But now, on this fateful night in Bakersfield, he could no longer avoid what was coming. Cruz and Patricia had met online. He appeared friendly and trustworthy, exchanging messages with Patricia and gradually gaining her trust. To a 13-year-old girl, it likely seemed innocent, just another conversation with someone she thought she could trust. But Cruz had much darker motives. When Patricia agreed to meet him in person, she could never have imagined the nightmare that awaited her. That night, Patricia snuck out of her house, her heart beating with excitement and a sense of independence that can often come with the thrill of exploring life as a teenager. They met at the designated spot pre-planned for his arrival. By all accounts, Cruz seemed friendly, even charismatic, but once they relocated to a more secluded place, Cruz's true nature was revealed. The evening turned violent without warning. Cruz brutally assaulted Patricia, subjecting her to terror no child should ever have to endure. It was not only an appalling breach of her trust, but also an act of inconceivable cruelty. After assaulting Patricia, Cruz strangled her to death, snuffed out her young life in an instant. But even that wasn't the end of his depravity. Cruz attempted to burn Patricia's body, believing he could destroy any evidence of his crime and avoid being caught. Meanwhile, back home, Patricia's family was growing increasingly anxious. Hours had passed and their daughter was nowhere in sight. In a state of utter distress, they reported her missing, which led to a full-scale search throughout the community that lasted deep into the early morning hours of the following day. The search for Patricia became more desperate as friends, family, and neighbors joined in, praying she would be found safe. They scoured the streets, posted flyers, and took to social media in a desperate attempt to piece together what might have happened to the vibrant girl they all loved so much. But as days passed, the heartbreaking truth began to unravel. The truth eventually caught up with Cruz, who thought he had covered his tracks. His careless attempt to dispose of Patricia's body and the digital trail he left behind led investigators straight to him. Finally, the police arrested Cruz, and as the details of his horrendous crime became clear, the community was left stunned and broken. Citizens of Bakersfield, once a quiet suburban sanctuary, now faced the unimaginable horror of losing one of their most cherished young girls in such a brutal way. Outside of Bakersfield, the news of Patricia's death resonated across the nation as people followed the case with outrage and sadness. How could such evil find its way into their town? As police dug deeper, shocking insights into Armando Cruz's past emerged. He was no stranger to law enforcement, having been involved in incidents that should have raised alarms about his violent tendencies. Yet, he had always managed to escape with minor consequences. It became clear that the system had failed to recognize the threat he posed, giving him the chance to destroy an innocent life. The grief for Patricia's family was overwhelming. They struggled to comprehend how such a terrible thing could happen to their daughter, wondering if there was anything they could have done to prevent this tragedy. Their lives, once filled with the joy and laughter Patricia brought them, were now consumed by an unbearable void. As the investigation progressed, so did the work of the legal system. The community followed the case closely, hoping for justice, though they knew no sentence could ever bring back the girl they had lost. In November 2022, Cruz stood motionless in court as the judge handed down his sentence: life in prison without parole. It was an appropriate sentence for a man who had never shown remorse for the horrific crime he had committed. But to Patricia's family, the sentence was a small consolation. Justice had been served, but their hearts were still shattered. Throughout his trial, Cruz never acknowledged the pain he'd caused and offered no signs of remorse or understanding of the devastation he had brought upon Patricia's family and the entire city of Bakersfield. In the end, though, it was a community of strength, bound together with the vow that Patricia's memory would not be lost in obscurity. The tragic death of Patricia became a rallying cry for change. Advocates in Bakersfield and beyond began pushing for better protections for children, especially in the digital world where predators like Cruz could hide behind screens, waiting to exploit vulnerable young people. Parents started having difficult but necessary conversations with their children about the dangers of meeting strangers online. The community vowed to do better, to protect its children from the darkness that had taken Patricia from them. We remember Patricia El Torre with prayers, as her story brings attention to the menace lurking in cyberspace and the fragility of our children's lives, a tragedy that calls for action. How can we, as a community, make both online and offline spaces safer for our children? What more can we do to ensure such horrors do not happen again? Let Patricia's story inspire us to be vigilant and never give up in the fight for the safety of our youth. In all three cases, the victims were more vulnerable due to their trust in those around them or their inability to foresee danger. These cases have captured media attention not only because of the heinous crimes committed, but also for reinforcing debates on safety, mental health, and justice. The common thread across these three tragedies is one of betrayal, vulnerability, and senseless violence, highlighting a lack of vigilance and justice that transcends borders.